Okay, welcome to SparkUp Startup Community and to our How to Start Business in Finland event. My name is Sonja Hyrynsalmi. I'm from Turku Science Park Ltd. and I'm the community facilitator of SparkUp. How many of you have visited here in SparkUp? Oh, well, quite many. Thank you. So maybe you already know that we are a startup community. We are open every workday from 8:30 to 16:30. And the basic idea in SparkUp is that we wanted to gather under the same roof all the startup organizations and actions and events here in Turku area. So this is the place to find people who are struggling with same kind of questions. Do I want to be an entrepreneur? Is my idea good enough? How I will get help to really validate my idea? And today in this event, my colleague Peter Lostedt will tell you about our Business Service Center Potkuri and our services there. So I really do hope that you will enjoy this event. This event is sponsored by Turku Science Park Ltd. and the Y2 project. Yes, have a nice afternoon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. All right. Welcome on my behalf as well. My name is Peter Lostedt and I work as a business advisor at Potkuri. Potkuri is the name you should remember if you want to set up a business here in Finland, in Turku especially, of course, because at Potkuri you will get all the help you need with calculations and business plans. There's also lots of discussions about startup grants and financing in general. So for the next half an hour to 45 minutes, I'll give a very brief description of what we do at Potkuri. And we of course collaborate very closely with SparkUp. We are all part of the same company, but at Potkuri you get sort of the specifics about business plans and timetables and so on. So remember Potkuri, and I'll just go ahead and start explaining what we do at Potkuri. Well, when you have a business idea and you come to Potkuri, these are the things that we generally discuss, among other things, of course. We, of course, try to figure out whether you know what it is to actually start a business. Do you understand the risks involved? Have you an idea of what you actually are going to do? Have you made some sort of a business plan? Do you have any calculations? And so on and so on and so on. Every time you come and visit us, we always also start by asking about your background. So what have you been doing before? What's your education? Are you just temporarily staying in Finland, for example, if you're a student or if you're from abroad working here, and so on and so on. So we try to get some sort of an idea of what your current situation in life is. Some might be a student and some are working, some might be unemployed, and so on and so on. So for each customer, the situation is always very difficult, or not very difficult, but very different from other customers. Sometimes it is difficult as well, especially if you want to start a business. So these are all the things that we discuss at Potkuri, and we try to get some sort of an idea of whether you are actually, or if your mindset is actually on becoming an entrepreneur. Then there are, of course, different forms of entrepreneurship. You can be a full-time entrepreneur, you can be a part-time entrepreneur. So there are, of course, options. You don't have to be a full-time entrepreneur, which again will increase the risk involved. But these are things that we generally always discuss together when you come and visit us. Then we also, of course, discuss what kind of forms of entrepreneurship there are available in Finland. And the majority, of course, wants to register a new company. That's the most common form. Then you can always, of course, also acquire a business. You can buy a business, or you can buy a part of it, or just the business itself, or you can even buy the entire company. Those cases are a bit tricky because there are lots of agreements involved. The process can be a bit long. So in those cases, if you want to buy a business, it's generally very good to have a bookkeeper involved, or let's say a consultant who will help you figure out the whole process and also the price of the company and so on. But we have quite a lot of those customers as well. Then, as it states in the slideshow, you can form a cooperative. You can also become a franchising business person. Quite rarely these days we have any franchising customers, but now and then people are interested in that. You can, as I said, become a part-time entrepreneur. That's a very easy option if you have, let's say, a normal day job and a normal salary, because then the normal day job will provide security, of course, in the form of income. So if you want to set up a part-time business, that's usually not a problem. If you are unemployed, however, then we have a problem, especially if you want to set up a business, because you can't basically earn a lot of money from a business if you are unemployed and getting benefits from the Finnish state, for example. So those are all things that we, as I said in the beginning, try to establish so we can help you in the best way possible. Right now you are at SparkUp, so you can of course also be a startup entrepreneur. You might have a team, you might have an idea that you want to develop further. Then this is the place that you need to be in order to do that. Of course, you can also become a shareholder in a limited company if you want to. That's also something that is not very often happening. So most people want to register a new business. That's the sort of simple solution if you want to become an entrepreneur. Then after we have established what you actually want to do, what your background is, your education and so on, then of course the business idea is the next thing you need to consider. And many people of course have thought about this quite a long while before they come and speak to us. So they have a very clear idea, usually, of what they want to do. In our opinion, the business idea should address these three questions that you can see. So what, to whom, and how. Those three basic questions apply, in my opinion, to every entrepreneur, regardless of where you're from, what your background is, and so on and so on. Those are the things that you need to consider. And if you do this, then the probability that you will have a successful business is far greater than if you sort of neglect this issue altogether. So we always emphasize that pay attention to the business idea, focus on it, think about it, and you can always, of course, also ask the advice of the business advisor, but you can also ask your friends and family what they think about it so that you get some sort of feedback, right? Feedback is important, so don't be alone with your business idea and your business plan. Show it to other people, unless you want to keep it secret for some reason. But otherwise, of course, the business advisor is a good person to show this business plan. We are, of course, sworn to secrecy. We can't reveal it to anyone, so that's of course a good way to get some sort of feedback. The business idea generally, of course, is usually based on the entrepreneur's expertise, background, education, but not always. Nowadays, it's fairly popular to want to, let's say, establish a restaurant or a cafe or something like that. And in many cases, those people don't have any sort of work experience in that field of business. But generally, most of our customers do have some sort of work experience from the field of business that they want to establish. And in our view, the business idea should address an issue. That would be a good starting point, right? So you start to develop your idea by addressing some sort of a problem, some sort of an issue that you want to solve. And if you can have some sort of solution to that, that really is a great way to sort of start the whole process. Then comes the difficult question: how can you earn money by doing this? And this, of course, is then from a business advisor's perspective important, because our job is also to address the risks involved. And the risks involved are, of course, can you make any income out of it? Especially if you become a full-time entrepreneur, then of course it's very different from being hired by a company and having a daily salary, right? So this is why the business idea, or why you should focus on these questions. And well, how do you do that? The easy solution is to make a business plan. And at Potkuri, we have a business plan template, which looks basically like this. The template is something that most people prefer to use. You can, of course, Google business plans. I think several hundred different ones will show up. But this is our version, and we have deliberately made it so simple that people basically shouldn't be able to misunderstand it. The topics can, of course, be a bit tricky to in very much detail talk about, but on a general level, these are the topics that we think you should focus on. I already talked about the business idea. You remember the 3 questions. Those are important. After you have described what you are planning to do, then on a general level, then you need to go into more specifics, and that's number 2, product or service. Under that topic, you need to describe in more detail about your service or your product that you are producing. But nothing extra about that, right? It's just a more detailed description of the product or service that you are intending to start. Then number 3 is interesting customers and market information. Some people like to do market surveys. They can be very small scale, they can be a bit larger scale, but it would be very nice to do some kind of research about what kind of customers would pay for your service or your product. In some cases, it's very simple. It might be a service just for women. In other cases, it can be for women and men, and there could be even a customer from some entirely different field that you think of. For example, let's say that you have some sort of a service that you intend to produce for private persons, but when you talk to the business advisor, there might be an idea that, hey, you could actually sell this to a municipality or something like that. So there's usually room for interpretation of the customer base that you are intending to have your business addressed to. So that's important. Number 4, sales and marketing. I usually encourage people to do like a separate marketing plan. And by that, I don't mean that they have to do like a 10-page essay in any way, but it's usually nice to try to think about, first of all, a budget for the marketing, because marketing can be very expensive in the beginning. So some sort of budget would be nice. I also think it's very nice to have some sort of a timeline for the marketing, so you could focus on the first 3 months, for example, and then maybe the next 6 months, and so on. So you specifically address marketing, and at the same time you can also focus on the sales. So who is actually doing the sales? Do you do it yourself? Do you need to hire someone? Or do you have some sort of network that will take care of it, and so on? Or do you have a web-based shop online or how do you actually plan to do that? So number 4 is critical in many ways, of course, in establishing whether you have like a very reasonable idea that can be implemented. So focus on sales and marketing. Marketing expenses are typically expenses that surprise people. They have an idea, but then when they actually want to launch the company, then there might be surprises involved. So that's why the budget is nice to do beforehand. Then we have company image. Well, for many that's relatively easy to think about. They already have an image in their head about what their company should represent and if there are values involved and so on. So that's typically relatively easy. And now to the last page of the business plan. So you can see that we go through this systematically, right? So when you do this, you force yourself to think about the topics. And this is not rocket science, right? So this is something I think anyone can do. And the business advisor, of course, then provides help if you are stuck on a specific topic, let's say. And financing is typically one of those topics. So most people would need some sort of money to get started. And if you come and discuss this idea with a business advisor, we usually have some sort of an idea where you can apply the money from. We talk a lot about startup grants. I'll return to that shortly. But then there's also, of course, normal bank loans, for example, Finnvera loans. I also talk about those in a minute. And so we go through the alternatives that you have. And then we also usually make some sort of expenditure calculation. So we try to estimate how much money you basically need to set up the business. Then after that, you also need money to survive the first, let's say, 2 or 3 months. And those months are usually the ones that people forget about. So they think about all the equipment that they need to buy, maybe a car and so on, but then they forget about the first running costs of the 2 or 3 months in the beginning. The startup grant might help a bit, but that's also something that you don't necessarily get. You can apply for it, but it's not automatic. So if you don't get the startup grant, it's even more important to focus on financing. Number 7, profitability and pricing. We always try to help you with the profitability calculation. The calculation is a bit complicated, even if it's not. So the calculation is something that most people have never done, especially if you are not familiar with the Finnish system and, let's say, pension insurances and other insurances and other costs involved. Then the profitability calculation is a very excellent tool because it will show you 3 important things. You first need to make some sort of a salary estimation of what you would like to get out of the business. Then you need to figure out what are the running costs, fixed costs that you need to pay, let's say, every month. And typically a rent is a fixed cost, insurances, bookkeeping, marketing expenses, and so on, and so on, and so on. And when we go through the list, the amount of money you usually need to put into these running costs can be significantly higher than you have anticipated. But the profitability calculation is very good because at the bottom of the calculation, you will get a figure, and that figure is the amount of money that you basically need to invoice every month or every week or every year in order for the calculation and equation to work. So it's simple mathematics, but as I said, most people haven't done this kind of calculation before. But at Potkuri, we will help you with this. Pricing is a bit more trickier even for the business advisor because there are so many different ideas that we discuss. We can't be an expert in every field of business, we generally have some sort of an idea, especially if it's, let's say, construction work or something like that, then we can pretty easily recommend or tell people what kind of normal hourly rates an entrepreneur might have. But then there are, you can understand, hundreds of different fields that you can actually do business in, and in many of those it can be very tricky for you or for me or for us together to come up with some sort of a pricing idea. So pricing is something that you usually need to try to find out by basically spying on competitors, for example. Very simple, but still you get an idea. And if you don't have any competitors, then you need to figure out what could I start with at least. And that depends on the idea totally, of course. So number 7, a tricky topic in many ways, but the calculation is something that will greatly help you establishing the amount of sales that you need to have. Then we have a SWOT analysis. I guess many people have heard about SWOT. If not, then that's something that we also can help you with. So you just think about strengths, opportunities versus weaknesses and possible threats. So that's in a way simple. Number 9, business calculations. Well, as I already said, we can help you with the profitability calculation, but then there's also an expenditure calculation that you can make, and we all have templates for those. So with all the sort of calculations, you can get help. And then in the end, we have a self-evaluation that you can make, so you try to evaluate yourself, your education, your work experience, whether you think that you are able to take risks, do you have the motivation to become an entrepreneur, and is your life situation, your current life situation, optimal to become an entrepreneur. So this is the business plan, and in my opinion, this is perhaps the most important thing that you should do. Especially if you want to become a full-time entrepreneur. If you want to become a part-time entrepreneur, this might not be that important because, again, the risks are very much smaller, but it's still, in my opinion, a good idea to do this just in case. So this is our business plan. Other business plans are much more complicated than this. Do they need to be? Not in our opinion. These are the basic topics that you need to think about. When you add the calculations, then you have a pretty nice formula that should at least enlighten you so that you will at some point actually make the decision, well, is this actually what I want to do? Do I understand the risks? Do I have the money involved? And so becoming an entrepreneur requires a certain amount of pre-work, in my opinion. So it's not something that you should just on a whim, decide. Think about it, plan it, and do the business plan, and you have a much greater chance of succeeding. So this is the business plan. Seems relatively simple, right? Yeah. That's also what we think, and that's also what our customers think. But of course, the topics can be a bit tricky, so then the business advisor will help. But yeah, let's move on, unless you have any questions about the business plan. Seems simple, right? Good. Let's move on. And then we have also an important topic. So which form of business would you then choose if you become an entrepreneur? And these are some of the factors that you need to take into account. The most important one and the most common one is how many people actually want to establish the business. If you are alone, then it's basically very simple. You have like 2 options. But if there are, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 people involved, then in Finland you can choose different forms of businesses, and I'll just show them in a minute or two. There are other factors involved. So you might want to think about the need for capital. You want to think about how flexible the business form should be. Sometimes there might be, let's say, an attitude of finance providers towards a certain business form. A limited liability company, for example, might have a better chance of getting certain financing, and so on and so on. And then there's, of course, taxation, which can be very tricky in many cases. But we have a solution for that, fortunately, which I will address very soon. So we talk about all these things. We ask you, are you doing this alone? Do you have a team? If not, then what's your own opinion about the business form? And then at some point, you will get basically this same information. So we discuss what are the options and what are the prices. And as you can see, the basic business form in Finland is called a private trader, toiminimi in Finnish. It's the most popular option by far. It's relatively easy to set up. You can do it online. It costs 75 euros. You get a business ID number, and then you can do business. So that's relatively simple in that sense. Then we have other options. One is the limited company, osakeyhtiö in Finnish. If you do that online, it's 330 euros and 380 euros if you do it in paper form. The limited company is basically the business form that all major companies are. And let's say, one factor that is involved when choosing a business form like a limited company is money, because as you can see, you need to have a minimum share capital of 2,500 euros, and in addition you have the registration fee. So you are almost at 3,000 euros compared to the private trader business form, which costs you 75 euros. But you can do the same things. So these two are the most popular ones. Then we have something called a general partnership and a limited partnership. These are very rare these days, but they are options. In some cases, for example, a general partnership might be a good idea, especially if you know very well the person or persons you are working together with. A general partnership is generally thought of basically as like a family business. So man and wife, for example, or sisters who trust each other. The assumption, of course, is that a married man and woman trust each other. Sometimes that might not be the case, but in those cases, a general partnership is actually a viable option. And as you can see, it's far more cheaper than having a limited company. But all these, and then we have a cooperative. Again, those are very rarely registered these days. So the private trader and the limited company, those are the most common options that people actually register. But let's move on. Time is ticking. And then for you guys, especially if you want to become a full-time entrepreneur, and I again repeat, a full-time entrepreneur, then you can apply for something called a startup grant, which is provided or not provided by the Finnish state. But it's only for full-time entrepreneurs. So if you have another day job, for example, you can't apply for this. If you are a student, there might be a problem, especially if you have to attend classes and lectures and you still have a lot of studying to do. But if you are, let's say, unemployed, or if you decide to quit, retire from your normal day job and want to become a full-time entrepreneur, then this is something that you can apply for. It's not something you will automatically get. You have to apply for it. The grant is not like a huge amount of money, but after taxes, you will get something between 550, 600 euros per month, something like that. If you apply for the startup grant, you get it for 6 months. And before the 6 months is over, you can apply for an extension for the next 6 months. So the theoretical maximum is a year of startup grant. Realistically, you should prepare to get it for only 6 months. You need to have a very good explanation why you should get the following 6 months. So be prepared that if you get it for 6 months, but you can always apply for an extension. There are, of course, conditions that need to be fulfilled in order to get the startup grant. The availability of money means basically that you don't need to have the money. It means that the Finnish state has to have the money. In 2015, in May, the Finnish state ran out of startup money altogether. After that, there has not been a problem, but that's of course one of the conditions. So there needs to be funding available for you. Then you need to have some sort of capabilities to actually become an entrepreneur. And how does the employment office is the one who is providing this grant, how does the employment office then decide? Well, you need to do a business plan, you need to do the calculations, you need to speak with a business advisor. Those are the 3 most important things. So you basically are forced to meet a business advisor so that the business advisor gets some sort of an idea of what you're doing. That's important to remember. And again, you need to be a full-time entrepreneur. There are other conditions as well. One is that the business idea should not distort competition. Well, what does that mean? It means that if you, for example, want to register, let's say, a cafe or a restaurant or a barber shop somewhere around the market square in the city center, then you understand that there's so much competition there that might be one reason why you don't get the startup grant. So that's something you can keep in mind. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get it, but it's definitely a factor that the employment office will consider. The situation changes if you want to set up a business, for example, somewhere in the archipelago, right? There's not much competition there, but is there enough customers is another question. So that's something you can keep in mind. One important thing that you need to remember is that you first have to apply for the startup grant. So first you apply, then you have to wait for the decision, and only after the decision has come, only then can you actually register the business. So first you apply, then you wait for the decision, and if it's green light, then of course you can register the company. But then you also understand that by definition you also become a full-time entrepreneur. So you will lose the protection of the employment office, for example, in regard to your, let's say, unemployment benefits, for example. The startup grant will just replace them, but for a limited period of time. You will also have like a background check. The employment office will check whether you have any unpaid taxes or anything like that, or if you have neglected to pay bills and so on, they will check that definitely. And as it says here, you should not have any other forms of income. So no daily job, no benefits like unemployment benefits or other benefits. So those are all things that you need to remember. These are the general sort of guidelines and conditions. If you have specific questions about the startup grant, then I strongly recommend that you contact the employment office directly, because they are the official, let's say, providers of an official answer as well. So at Potkuri we have a general idea how this works, and this is basically how it works, but many people have different situations in life, and there might be a sudden need to register the business even before you have the application done, for example. Then in all those cases, be in contact with the employment office before you do anything. If you do something beforehand, then there might be a big risk of losing the possibility for a startup grant. So always contact the employment office. Of course, you can also contact Potkuri if you want to, but the official answer is basically what you need from the employment office. So this is basically the startup grant in a very short description. Remember the full-time, that's important. So you need to be a full-time entrepreneur. Then you can apply for it. So that's what you need to remember. And of course the conditions you can always read online as well. So you can go to the employment office and web pages, and you can read about the startup grant there. Good. Questions about startup grant? No. Everything is clear. Usually it's not clear, but as I said, these are all things we then, yeah.
What if your business fails?
If the business fails, then you basically need to shut down the business if you want to have some sort of unemployment benefits from the employment office. Yeah. So that's not a catastrophe in that sense, if in regard to social protection, but it usually requires that you shut down the business, you remove it from all the taxation registers and so on. So you have basically proof that you don't do the business anymore. Yeah.
What if, what kind of resident permit do you need? Citizenship, what do you need?
Yeah, that's something that usually people ask, and from our perspective, all you need is a social security number. So if you have that, you are basically allowed to do some sort of business here in Finland. But from your perspective, you of course need to figure out, is it worthwhile to establish a business if I only have, let's say, a permit for half a year or something like that. So the social security number is the most important one in regard to this. But if you have some sort of a process still pending with the migration office, then you can always contact them as well. But when you register the company, you need to have a social security number. And this is also something that we then discuss with the business advice in the business advisement session, that are you actually, do you really want to do this at this point if you don't know whether you are going to stay or not? So a good question, but I also basically will outsource the answer to the migration offices, for example, so you can check there, because everyone has a different background and there might be certain conditions that are not applicable to everyone.
So what if you apply for a loan? Question number one, how easy is it to get a loan from a bank, considering the amount of the loan?
Yeah.
And question number two, if you do file for bankruptcy, if the business fails, how do you pay it back?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll return to it in a bit, because financing will come next, basically. So yeah, but so this is the startup grant, and then we move on. Well, now we have financing. So yeah, as I already earlier told you, basically most people need some sort of financing, and here are the options that you basically have if we think about a very normal situation. Of course, you theoretically can find investors, business angels, right? But from a practical perspective, it's relatively unlikely. So if you want to find, let's say, 10,000 euros or 20,000 euros for your business, then these are the sources that usually come up. You can apply for a bank loan, or you can apply for something called a Finnvera loan. Finnvera is a state-owned bank in a way that is solely existing because it provides loans for business people like perhaps you once will then become. So you can apply for a Finnvera loan or a bank loan. There are differences, as you can see here. The good thing about the Finnvera loan is that they will base their evaluation solely on the business idea. They don't need any real security, in other words, money or a house or anything like that as a security. So the business plan and the calculations are the basis when Finnvera will make the decision. Finnvera can also call us, they do it actually regularly, and ask, what's my opinion about this certain customer? And then I tell the Finnvera person that what I think. Sometimes it might be helpful, sometimes it might not. They will make the decision. But this Finnvera loan is pretty handy because, as you can see, you can apply for it up to 50,000 euros. After that, then a bank will become involved. But if it's under 50,000 euros, then Finnvera can provide it themselves. So that's pretty handy. And with 50,000 euros, most of our customers will get the financing that they need. The interest rate is basically the same in both cases. It depends on the current situation and, of course, on the applicant. So we never get any information of what the interest rates are. But it's the same in both cases. The Finnvera loan is typically relatively short, 5-6 years, something like that. With the bank, you can negotiate a longer loan, 10 years, for example. So be prepared that the Finnvera loan, if you get it, is something that you need to pay back relatively quickly. And then, of course, in the calculations, you need to add these loan repayments. And that's also something people often forget. But these are the options, basically. And you asked about how easy it is to get a loan. Well, nowadays, they are pretty strict. So yeah, it depends on your business idea. It depends whether you can invest a certain amount of your own money into the business. If you don't have any of your own money and you don't have any real security, a car or a house or anything like that, yeah, then it's tricky to get a loan from Finnvera or from the bank. So financing is tricky. It's tricky for anyone. And the business idea forms the basis, of course, of that, the business plan and the calculations, because the calculations will show also to the bank that you are serious and that you have been thinking about this for a long time. So that's, again, a very good reason to do the business plan and the calculations, because even if you don't need the financing in the beginning, you might need it after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and then you already have like some sort of basis for making all those calculations. So yeah, it can be tricky. And then if we think about bankruptcy and problems, let's say, then especially if you have like a private trader, you remember the business form, one of the things you need to remember that with that business form, you are personally responsible for the loan. So if, for example, the business fails, then you still need to pay back the loan somehow. If you have a limited company, then it's a bit different because then the actual company will take the risk. Your only risk is the amount of money you put into the business. So those are also things you need to consider if and when you have a loan. Again, it's very good to directly contact Finvera or directly contact a bank and discuss this. You basically all have a bank right that you have your account in, so that's something you can start. But as a general rule, if you want to have like a proper loan negotiation, you should bring at least 3 things. Bring a business plan, bring a profitability calculation, and preferably an expenditure calculation. Then the bank manager or whoever you will talk to will at least see documentation of what you have done. So it's good to bring like a portfolio with you and present them to the bank personnel. So this is my business plan, this is my calculations, this is what I want to do. Then at least you will have a greater chance of receiving a loan. But yeah, it can be tricky. It can be tricky for anyone, yeah.
Is it possible to get a loan from both at the same time?
Yes, you can basically, especially if the loan is, let's say, a big loan, 100,000 or something like that, then there is a possibility that Finvera and any bank will split the risk between them. Yeah. Finvera can also become involved in a big loan by providing a security for a large portion of the loan. So they might secure maybe 70–80%, and then you are left with maybe 20% with your own money, so to speak, that you need to invest. Something like that. Yeah. But those are all negotiations then between the bank and Finvera and yourself, of course. So if your typical, let's say our typical customer has a loan demand of, let's say, 15–20,000, that's usually what people need. So that kind of a loan is, in my opinion, relatively small. So typically, maybe Finvera can provide that. But then once we get up to, let's say, 40, 50, 60,000 euros, then the bank will evaluate your idea quite, strictly. So it then depends on whether you're alone or if you have business partners, and again, if you have your own money to invest. Yeah.
Okay. How many times we can apply Finvera? For example, if the business works well, but after 5 years, 10 years, we need to make innovation.
Yeah. It depends how the business is running. If you run a successful business, it shouldn't be a problem. But also when you discuss the whole idea with the business advisor, then we typically also address this issue. So I usually, if people come to me, let's say they think that 10,000 euros will be enough to start the business. But then when we get to the calculations and look at the calculations, then many times it can be 15,000, it can be 20,000, 25,000. So it's also important to try to adjust the need for the loan so that it's realistic, so that you perhaps don't need to apply for a second loan after, let's say, 1 or 2 years, but you also, or immediately apply for large enough of a loan. But it shouldn't be a problem if you have like a good, successful business. Yeah. So as far as I know, there's no limit on how many, times you can ask for this.
And as much we have a partner, a big team,
Yeah.
more easier to get.
It might be easier, yeah. If there's many of you, then perhaps the bank or Finvera will see that, okay, the risk is spread around you, and there's usually more money involved that you can invest from the team. Yeah. But these are all case specific, so it's always between you and these parties to then decide and negotiate. Okay, time is running very quickly. Let's move on. I briefly tell you about a very important insurance. There are other insurances, of course, a lot of them, that might be very useful, but those usually we discuss, of course, if you come to Potkuri. This is something you should remember. If you become a full-time entrepreneur, then it's very important to to remember the pension insurance. It's called YEL-vakuutus, the pension insurance in Finland, and it is based on a figure that you yourself will provide to the pension insurance company. The least amount that you need to insure yourself with is 7,656 euros. So if your income from a business is lower than that, you don't need to take the pension insurance. If it's over that limit, then basically you need to take the pension insurance, you need to pay pension insurance fees, but it will also accumulate pension for you. It's also your social security, so sick day allowances, for example, are based on the figure that you will provide to the pension insurance company. The figure is something that you will decide yourself. It can be the minimum amount, it can be 15,000, 20,000, 50,000, but of course the higher you get, the more pension insurance fees you need to pay, but also the more pension it will accumulate for you. This is a bit tricky. It's much easier to describe this if and when you come and discuss this business idea to Potkuri. But just remember the pension insurance, it's important. And if you are a new entrepreneur, you get a 22% discount for the first 4 years. So that's pretty good. But yeah, so this is important. And as I said, we have other insurances as well. But this one is the mandatory, obligatory insurance that you need to have if you especially are a full-time entrepreneur. You might still need to take this even if you are a part-time entrepreneur if you exceed the 7,656 euros per year. But yeah, you can read about this online as well. Then very shortly about taxation. In Finland we have 2 direct taxations. One is income tax and the other one is something you definitely heard about, value-added tax. The income tax is basically based on your income, and it of course varies between the forms of enterprise. So that's also one reason why you should and could talk to our taxation officer. Her name is Terttu Suomalainen. She works at the taxation office very close by at Lemminkäisen katu, this street. She's nice, she speaks English as well, so she can also provide assistance in regard to taxation questions. We also have the value-added tax. Of course, one thing to remember about that tax is that it's a tax that is directed at the consumer. It's not a tax that is directed at you. You need to include it in the price of your product or service if your sales for a year exceeds 10,000 euros. So if you are below that, you don't need to join the value-added trade register. If your sales are higher than that, then you are forced to join the register and add the value-added tax in your prices. It is a tax that basically just goes through your company. You need to pay the state the VAT that you have collected, or more specifically, your bookkeeper will do this. There's not like a separate section about bookkeeping, but now that I remember it, it is very handy to have a bookkeeper. Of course, you need to pay for the service, but to find a very good bookkeeper who can speak English, who can help you, is, in my opinion, really worth the money. Then the bookkeeper will take care of all these nasty taxes and value-added taxes and deductions and so on and so on. There's always someone you can call and ask. Terttu Suomalainen is working at the taxation office. She can help you, but she is not your private bookkeeper. So you can't, constantly go to her and say that I again need help. Then the good question arises, where are all the good bookkeepers? Yeah, where are they? They are out there somewhere, but to find one that will be really important, especially if the bookkeeper understands the field of business that you are doing. So if you are importing, for example, stuff or exporting, it would be very nice to have a bookkeeper who understands that business, and so on and so on. But yeah, taxation, of course, is something that is absolutely required to think about. Who will do it? Will you do it yourself, or will you hire a bookkeeper? And if you hire a bookkeeper, how much does it cost? We have a general idea of what the bookkeeping costs are, but those are typically costs that are involved in the fixed costs. And those are, again, costs that many people forget. Yeah.
So are there any companies which provide bookkeeping for certain categories of business?
There are, and the problem is that many are like when you Google them, they on a general level present, their bookkeeping company. But then there are many times sort of experts in the company itself that can provide certain assistance. And the problem is, where do you find them? And that's a very, general or typical question that we get. Where could you find? Can you help us? And unfortunately, we don't have a network that we can provide. So it's basically up to you. It's very good if you can ask someone who is already an entrepreneur if they know a good bookkeeper. That's usually a good reference for that. But yeah, it's tricky to find a good bookkeeper. It's tricky for anyone. It's tricky for someone who is born in Finland and speaks Finnish or Finnish as their mother tongue. They run into the same problems. How to find a good, reliable bookkeeper who can assist them when they actually need help. Yeah. So I emphasize that. Good. 2 slides left, I think. And I can't understand that I've been talking for an hour already. So let's wrap this up. Permits. In Finland, we have something called freedom of trade, which means that most businesses don't require permits. However, there are exceptions, of course. Typical exceptions are, let's say, cafes, restaurants, businesses that deal with food. They require hygiene passes. If you have a restaurant, you might need to build a toilet or something like that, then you need a construction permit. You may need a permit to sell alcohol. You might need a permit to sell tobacco. You might need a permit to play music in your business. Then we also have some professions that are very strictly controlled in Finland, and one typical business is healthcare. So doctors, nurses, physiotherapists are all governed by something called Valvira, which is an agency that provides these licenses. So if you are planning to start a business that is dealing with food or restaurant or cafe, or you want to provide healthcare services, then there is a very high probability that you need to apply for a permit. So the business advisor generally has an idea what you should have, but it's of course up to you to establish whether you need a business or not. And this is typically something you should do before you set up the business. So remember the permits. Well, what should you do next? You can make an appointment with a business advisor by calling the number on the screen. If you want to speak English, you should of course mention it. If you want to speak Finnish or Swedish, that's perfectly all right. If you want to perhaps speak Greek or Spanish, you can also speak to one of a business advisor who can speak those languages. So that's the number you should call and make an appointment. You always have to make an appointment. You can't just extempore come to Potkuri and demand an audience with a business advisor. It doesn't work like that. We typically have a week or 2-week queue that you need to consider. So call, make an appointment, and then you will get a time. It's very good if you can do a preliminary business plan. It will help. You don't need to do it, but we strongly recommend that you do it. The calculations we will help you with, but if you want to, you can try them out. On Potkuri's website, you can find, if I remember correctly, the business plan and perhaps the calculations as well. The business plan should be there. If not, then a business advisor can send them to you in advance. So always make an appointment, and when you make the appointment, try to very shortly describe what kind of business you are establishing. Some of the business advisors have certain, let's say, specialty areas that they perhaps know a bit more about. So if you want to register a company that is producing games, for example, then you can just point it out, and so on. So that's what you should do. And we are, as you probably know, very close by in the ICT building, 100 or 150 meters that way. And that's where we then receive you and try to help you as much as possible. This is free service, it doesn't cost anything. You basically would be stupid not to use it. Can we always give you sort of a very specific advice? No. We give general advice. And so sometimes you might need to find a consultant, for example, and then pay for that service. But we give help, we try to help, and those people who come through our services have a greater chance to succeed as business owners. That's guaranteed. Thank you for your time. It took a bit while longer than I thought, but that's how it goes when you discuss interesting things. We maybe have a little bit time for questions, yeah?
Yes. Just would like to know if the meeting with the advisor is keeping like secret.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
any business
Yeah. It's strictly confidential. Yeah. So the question was that is the meeting confidential? And of course it is. We work in closed rooms, so there's no one else there. And of course, we can't tell anyone about your business ideas. So it's strictly confidential. It's between you and me when you come and discuss your idea. And so that's of course evident. Yeah.
When you do suggest to the bank or to the Finland,
Yeah.
About like what your thoughts are about the
Yeah.
business, is it more personal about what you feel about the person, or is it about their business idea? Of what kind of objectivity do you?
It's both, in my opinions, because at least I try to get like a general idea of who you are. And as I said many times in the beginning, what your current life situation is. Are you working, are you studying, or are you unemployed? What's your sort of current status? And then, of course, on top of that comes all the business calculations and the business plan and your idea as a whole. So when I make some sort of a statement to Finvera or a bank, it's based on all these things. It's like a broad perspective of what I think are the chances that you will succeed as a business person. So there's social issues involved, but there's also, of course, calculations and planning. Yeah.
Again, about the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I think on everybody's mind. If you do become bankrupt,
Yeah.
you can't apply for a loan again.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
How do you pay it back? Through salaries, regular job?
Yeah, then you may need to make some sort of agreement with the the party that is providing the loan for you, for example. Then it's between you and them to come up with a solution. It depends how much loan you have, and then of course if you get some sort of normal day job, then absolutely you need to pay back. Yeah. So, but those are of course the worst case scenarios, and but of course it's a relevant question. But most people, let's say, try to limit the risk so that they don't apply for like a huge amount of money. So as I said, typically the loan that some of our customers want to apply for is between 10 to 20,000 euros, and of course it's a lot of money, but it's still not like a huge amount. So if the business idea fails, then you need to, of course, have some sort of backup idea that do you want to apply for a job and then try to pay back the debt. But it can be a tricky process, and there's different parties involved. You can also get help if you are in a situation that looks very bad. Then there are contact numbers that we can provide you.
And when you're applying for a loan, a big loan, when you need something for security, can you give up the infrastructure you're building for your business as security from the same one?
It depends a bit what kind of, well, if you have a business that you have bought, let's say, machinery, equipment into, then yeah, you might have that as a security. But if you don't have, let's say, any equipment or investments into the business, then typically the bank wants your own money, or let's say a car or a house or an apartment or something like that.
So it's easier with the machinery?
It depends. It might not be. It's always up to the bank to decide that. Yeah.
In Potkuri, do you provide the full time in English, or is it just one meeting can be in English? Because in the office they told me that you provide only in Finnish. Something changed now, or?
They are speaking rubbish. Yeah, we can help you in English all the way.
So all the way can be with personal advisor.
Yeah.
Okay, and one more question. I saw in Turku there's different kind of organizations now who helps with this building up business, open your yritys and so on.
Yeah.
Like Vana, for example. Is there some differences, or is it like just different organizations who provide the same goal?
Well, there are many different organizations who try to help starting business people, but our service is paid by taxpayers. It's free of service in that sense. But then we have all these other support organizations who are also part of, for example, SparkUp, who try to help as well, if that's what you mean. But then we, of course, also have commercial companies who can provide basically the same help as I can, right? So they can help you with business, but of course you then need to pay for that service.
And with Potkuri advisors, you're pretty sure that your idea is secured, that they don't tell about it to anyone.
Okay.
So those are really professionals who, usually there's some people who maybe don't know the whole picture, they don't see the whole picture about the grants and that kind of things.
Yeah.
So it's maybe secure for you also.
Yeah. The good benefit by coming to Potkuri is that we have a really large network around us. So we know Finvera, we know banks, we know insurance companies, and we have a dialogue with them constantly. So the information that we give you should be up to date compared to perhaps other services. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But if you have, for example, for creative business, your idea is doing something with the creative business, then for example, Treve, Leena Janula sitting over there, she's the one also who can help you with that idea.
Yeah. So it depends on your business, but you should always ask Sonia or me, for example, if we know someone who might be specialized in your field of business. And sometimes, of course, it might be a company that, again, you would need to pay for their services, but then our reference is usually a good one.
Yeah. Okay, I get it.
One or two questions more, then I need to go, unfortunately.
A quick question about part-time entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
You have mentioned about OU that if it reaches a certain threshold, it has
Yeah.
to register for VAT tax.
Yeah.
What about part-time entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's basically the same. Yeah. So it doesn't matter whether you are part-time or not. If you exceed certain levels, the VAT is 10,000 euros, and then you perhaps remember the pension insurance, 7,600 something. Those are all figures you can keep in mind, because if you have a part-time company, part-time business, then at some point you might exceed those levels, and then by law you are required to join certain registers. But it depends, yeah. Okay, one more. I think you were before him. Yeah.
In your opinion, is it a good moment to open a business? I mean, the environment.
Yes, it is compared to 2 years ago, for example. As you probably have read in the news, in Finland, things are finally improving in the economic sense. So we are growing faster. Our economy is growing faster than Sweden or Norway, those countries that are typically compared to us. So everything is going strong. This region is very good in the sense that we have a lot of building going on here. We are building ships, we are building cars. Well, that's in Uusikaupunki, but still. So yeah, in my opinion, this is a very good time to start a company. But
and the government and the banks are facilitating.
Yeah, I think the government is understanding that they need to support new entrepreneurs. Of course, the basic guidelines are the same. You still need to think about the business plan and the calculations. But the, let's say, business atmosphere is good in my opinion. And this city is great in the sense that there's so many different nationalities involved here. There's so many students from other countries, researchers, and employees, and so on and so on. So it's like a good mix, in my opinion. So yeah, of course, it's in my opinion, it's a good time to be a business owner right now, as I said, compared to a few years ago.
Just
Time
one
is
question we can
very short.
Does Potkuri provide study on the market, what the customer needs in basic?
No.
With your potential customer?
No, not that kind of service. Yeah. So that's again something you need to research yourself. Yeah. At some field of businesses, we might have a general idea, but yeah, that's something you need to do it yourself, or then again try to find someone who can do it for you and then pay for it. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Almost 1.5 hours of information. Hopefully you are not like completely, overwhelmed by all this information. This is just the tip of the iceberg, basically. There's lots of detail that you need to consider. But these are the main topics that we discuss all the time at Potkuri, every day, every week. And you are very welcome to Potkuri. Thank you.
Thank you.